Good afternoon, and thanks for joining Washington, D.C.-based Jennifer Schaus & Associates in our Get FAR Cited in 2020 complimentary webinar series. As you know, the FAR, or Federal Acquisition Regulations, is the rule book that the federal government must follow when making purchases. Our webinar pulls from contracting experts to explain each part of the FAR. It is complimentary and recorded. We will post all of the recordings on our website and YouTube channel, where we have over 400 government contracting webinars available for download. A special thanks to our webinar partner in this series, the National Veteran Small Business Coalition Education Foundation. Please visit their website to learn more about the organization. We would also like to thank our friends at Open the FAR for their sponsorship. If your organization is interested in sponsoring the series or one part, please contact hello@jenniferschaus.com. And now a little bit about us. We work with primarily large businesses to help them navigate the federal marketplace. We work with both product and service companies as well as software firms. Our clients span the globe and include publicly traded organizations in a variety of sectors. We provide market analysis reports, contract administration, contract vehicle assistance, and more. All of our services can also be built into a training course for your team. Learn more about us on our website. And now we would like to let you know about some ways to reach government and government contractors through us. We offer advertising and sponsorship opportunities through our weekly newsletter and also on our webinar series. For pricing or replace an order, please email us at hello@jenniferschaus.com. And as noted, we have over 400 webinars in our archives. As we continue to educate federal contractors, I would like to bring to your attention our webinar schedule for 2021. Full schedule and speakers are all confirmed. First up is a monthly series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. This is a live webinar series held each month. These will take place on the second Friday of each month in 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen and then take your live questions about that topic. So for example, January will kick off with our panelists covering CMMC on Friday, January 8th. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals. You can sign up on our website under the Q&A Cafe tab. Sponsorships are available. Please email hello@jenniferschaus.com for a media kit and pricing details. And in our second webinar series in 2021, we will be covering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations. Similar to our current FAR series, this will be a weekly series dedicated to defense contracting, its rules, and regulations. This series is complimentary and will be held on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. We will run through the parts sequentially, which means that we start the year with DFARS Part 201 and finish with Part 252 at the end of the year. You can sign up on our website under the DFARS tab. And again, sponsorships are available. Please email hello@jenniferschaus.com for a media kit and pricing details. Now let's move on to learn a bit about today's speaker, Eric Weitzel. You can find his contact information here. And today we are covering FAR Part 48 with Eric. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Colton. I'm Eric Weitzel. I'm a partner with Stinson, which is a law firm with offices from DC to Dallas to Denver, based primarily in the Midwest. I've spent years in Washington, D.C., but now I work in Stinson's downtown Denver office. I'm the co-chair of the firm's Government Contracts and Investigations group. I'm going to talk today, as Colton said, about FAR Part 48, value engineering. This is a pretty dense part of the FAR. I'm going to try to hit on some high points to prepare you if you want to go ahead and dive in. So I want to start. Next slide. I want to start just kind of going over what we're going to cover. We're going to talk first about some terms and concepts that will help make some of the other discussion make more sense. Policies, procedures, both of these things are touched on in the FAR. Talk about sharing arrangements and contract clauses and when to use them. There will be a number of takeaways at the end that I think you'll find helpful. So let's turn now to the next slide. We're going to start with key terms and concepts. Next slide. So this is about a decade-old statement. It comes from an award ceremony at DoD, but I think it really captures the heart of what value engineering as a concept is all about. And if you look there, it talks about the way forward is embedded in value engineering mandate, and the mandate is reduce cost, increase quality, improve mission capabilities. And one way to think about that is essentially it's just all about getting better outcomes, better procurement outcomes for the government. Next slide. So what is value engineering. When we say value engineering, the term encompasses attempts to eliminate things that add acquisition, operation, support costs without providing corresponding value, all without impairing the essential functions or characteristics. So the government still wants to get the goods and services that it has requirements for. It doesn't want to give anything up there, but we're hoping through value engineering to identify ways to reduce costs that really aren't adding anything that's valuable to the government. And if this sounds somewhat familiar, it should. If you're active in this space, you probably come across the concept in procurement decision award basis of best value, which balances the cost with actually the value that's being delivered. Value engineering does a similar analysis, focusing on the functions of the item or the process or the services to figure out what can we do to improve that outcome. Both from a lot of the focus is often on cost, so we're certainly looking at cost, but also this notion of value improvement. Best value in this case, in this context, we're looking for items or processes that consistently perform that required function at the lowest life cycle costs. And so when we talk about value improvement and sort of the goal of value engineering, you have to look beyond the immediate impact. We're looking more long-term. The government has a long-term perspective, and I think that's important to keep in mind as you engage with the government on value engineering opportunities. Next slide. Those opportunities abound in federal procurement, which makes sense if you think about it, because this notion of best value or value improvement, it can be anywhere within the process, the government's process of procuring, the contractor's process of performing. And so there's all sorts of areas where the DoD, for example, has used value engineering to the benefit of the agency and the benefit of the company and the taxpayers. And this is just a listing. I think it's construction, equipment, logistics is a big one, site preparation, publications, manuals, procedures. Those are things that can be very costly to put together. If you can drive those costs down, that's certainly a benefit. Testing, test equipment and procedures is another hot area where there's a lot, and often there's a lot of opportunities for value improvement. Let's next slide, please. This is a simple example. It's sort of an anecdote. It comes from another DoD document, and it really focuses on value engineering in practice with the Black Hawk helicopter. So there was an Army value engineering team that determined that the old stabilator amplifiers on Black Hawk helicopters could be replaced by a new device, the dual stabilator controller, the DSC. So the DSC has proven to have, it was estimated to have, and has proven to have better reliability. And because it has a built-in test capability, you could avoid a lot of the maintenance burden, because the old antiquated stabilator amplifiers, you had to have another expensive, complicated, hard to use test set. So having it built in makes maintenance a lot easier. The new device reduced the logistics footprint as well and improved mission performance. It had the maintenance, it required less than 1/10 of the maintenance of the predecessor. The cost to repair went down over $2,000 per unit. So with all of the increased reliability, the logistics savings, the reduced maintenance downtime, et cetera, the government, because of this one change from the antiquated device to the new sealed single box built-in test capability DSC, government saved over $28 million, either in cost savings or just avoiding paying costs. And so that's just a simple example of one change having a lot of impacts, a lot of different, logistics, maintenance, it's a manufacturing thing. Lots of impacts just from this one change. So that's sort of a little bit of background on what we're talking about in terms of value engineering and its goals. Next slide. So value engineering, they're basically two flavors. One is voluntary, and that's where the government, another word that's used for this is value engineering incentive, or VE incentive. That's where the government says to the contractor, hey contractor, you can voluntarily suggest changes to the contract that you think will mean that you can perform more economically. And then if that's the case and we accept that, you can share in part of the savings that result from your change. And so what the contractor does is put together a value engineering change proposal, a VECP. And if it is accepted, then the contractor shares in the savings to a certain percentage, and is also reimbursed its allowable development and implementation costs. The idea behind these voluntary VE incentives are that they shouldn't increase the cost to the government. They really are trying to drive a value improvement. Now, that's voluntary. There's also a directed or required or mandatory form of value engineering that's sort of baked into the solicitation and the government requirements. So there, the government is requiring the contractor to establish a program to identify and submit to the government methods for performing more economically. So it's baked into what, with one of the deliverables, there's a specific line item or a specific value engineering program effort that the government expects to be paying for, because they've identified this is a contract that has great potential return on investment. We want to not only encourage and incent voluntary suggestions, but we actually want to have a program in place where the contractor is required to be thinking about this and reporting to us its conclusions along the way. So the level of sharing, as we'll discuss later, is different between voluntary and directed. Next slide, please. So in both cases, whether it's voluntary or mandatory or directed, what we're looking for are acquisition savings. And acquisition savings in the FAR are defined as savings resulting from the application of the VECP to contracts awarded by the same contracting office or its successor for essentially the same unit. So if you just think about that, it's very clear, and it's clear in the FAR, that acquisition savings are not limited to the contract that is modified once the VECP is accepted. There are different kinds of savings that are included when we think about total acquisition savings. First is the instant contract savings. Instant contract meaning the contract where under which the VECP was accepted and to which modifications were made as a result of the VECP. So that's instant contract. There's also concurrent contracts, and that would be contracts that are in place at the same time, either with the same contractor or perhaps other contractors. And they might not involve exactly the same unit. Then there are future contract savings, and there just think about savings on follow-on contracts. So the same contracting office, we've just had a production contract for 5 years. We want to have another production contract for 5 years. So there's a potential there for future contract savings as well. At the end of the day, what's most important, though, is net acquisition savings. So that's the total acquisition savings, instant, concurrent, future contract savings, less the government costs. So next slide. I already mentioned instant contract. Also, there are costs that may be incurred by both the contractor and the government. So I just talked about in connection with net acquisition savings, government costs. Well, government costs are the agency's costs that result directly from developing and implementing the VECP. And so that might be net increases in testing costs or operations, maintenance, or logistics support. Remember, we're looking at the long-term life cycle So the government may actually have to spend a little bit of money, incur some costs to make this change that it has determined is going to be valuable over time. I mentioned earlier contractor development and implementation costs. These are the costs that are incurred in connection with the VECP for preparing, coming up with the VECP, submitting it, and also cost of making the corresponding changes. So that may be, we're going to have to make some value engineering incentive payments to subcontractors because they're going to have to do some things in connection with implementing the VECP. So again, I mentioned earlier, if the VECP, a voluntary VECP is accepted, then the contractor can recoup those allowable development and implementation costs. Next slide. All right, so I want to talk about policies now. These are policies that are in the FAR. Go ahead to next slide, Colton. So in general, the FAR and our government really believes in value engineering, and it requires agencies to establish and maintain cost-effective value engineering procedures and processes. And so each agency has its own set of rules. And the FAR also requires that VE provisions are included in quote unquote appropriate supply, service, A&E, construction contracts. So there's lots of VE opportunities and lots of different kinds of contracts. And also it may be, VE provisions may be included in appropriate subcontracts. I think the question there is just to ask whether there are value engineering opportunities or obligations that might result from a VECP that would be felt by subcontractors. New paragraph, or new slide. So it's important to remember, or as you're thinking about this, you may have the question, well, wait a minute, I've got some value engineering incentive payments. How does that interact with the notion of profit or fee? And in general, they're two different things. Generally, you're not going to be adjusting profit or fee downward as a result of a VECP being accepted. And really, you take the profit or fee kind of out of the calculation when you're determining what the VE incentive payments are. Agencies, just like they have to have overarching policies, procedures, and processes for value engineering. Part of that is the included procedures for funding and payment of a contractor's share of collateral savings and future contract savings. Remember, beyond the instant contract, if the government is going to be paying a contractor as a result of some value engineering, it's going to have to come up with that money somewhere. And so certainly the government, each agency has its own rules and procedures for finding that money. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as you think about what you're going to be able to negotiate with the government in terms of sharing amounts and the sharing period. Next slide, please. Speaking of the sharing period, so the contracting officer is going to decide on a case-by-case basis what the sharing period and the sharing rates for a particular VECP are, and there are guidelines in the FAR. And this slide just lists a number of factors that are supposed to be considered by the CO, things like the extent and complexity of the change, the contractor's risk in developing this, the development cost, the number of units affected, how much time is left on the instant contract, and with the production period. So number of different factors. It's very much case by case. It's very fact driven. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as you're putting together your VECP and you're trying to figure out exactly what it is you're going to pitch to the government. And I always like to take an answer and reasons that that's the right answer. And so you should be thinking about these factors as you're engaging with your contracting officer, because you know they are required to think about these. Next slide, please. All right, so now we talked about policies. Let's talk a little bit about procedures. Like we said, agencies have processes and procedures. Part of that is that the contracting officer or other designated official is supposed to promptly address and assess a VECP following those rules. Generally, the acceptance or rejection should come within about 45 days of the receipt. COs can approve all or part of the VECP, and they would have a contract modification that incorporates whatever's been approved. If, on the other hand, the VECP is rejected by the contracting officer, they have to provide prompt written notice and an explanation describing why the rejection occurred. Next slide. In all of this, the government has a great deal of discretion. So the government gets to decide whether to accept or reject all or part of a VECP. The government determines the collateral cost or the collateral savings in terms of what is going to be part of the basis for determining what's shared. They decide which of the sharing rates applies, and also the duration of the sharing period. And so we'll talk about these things, but there's a lot that gets decided by the CO. And again, you need to have all of that in mind as you engage with them to talk about VECPs and try to take to them all the reasons that what you want is the right answer. So next slide, please. Talk about sharing periods. Next slide. Right, so like I said, the contracting officers have to decide for each VECP what the sharing period is. Now, if you've got more than one VECP on a particular contract, the sharing periods don't have to match. They can, but they don't have to. Remember, we talk about this being very fact-driven. So it may not match, but generally, the sharing period starts with the acceptance of the first unit that actually reflects the VECP, and it generally ends between 3 and 5 years from then. The CO, using its discretion, sets that at the outset, and so it's not something that's redetermined later on. Or the sharing period ends on the last scheduled delivery date under the instant contract that was based on the schedule that was in place when the agency accepted the VECP. And so there's several options for the CO to choose from, and again, it may differ from one VECP to the other. Next slide. So this is a chart I wanted to make sure you had. It sort of collects information that's in a couple parts of the FAR, the FAR Part 48, and also in the clauses reflect this. So the sharing savings, how we're going to split the savings once the CO decides what the savings are, depend on several things. First of all, the contract type, you see there in the left-hand column, and then whether it's voluntary or required, so a VE incentive or a VC program requirements, and then whether or not we're talking about the instant contract versus a concurrent or future contracts. And so in each of these where we have the 50-50, those proportions, the government share is listed first. So it's government getting 50%, contractor getting 50%, but in a cost reimbursement contract, instant contract under a voluntary VE incentive, the government will get 75%, the contractor gets 25%, but in the CO's discretion, they can adjust that so that the contractor gets as much as 50% of the savings. So this is maybe just a little bit of, there's no reason to walk through all of that, but it's a nice resource. It collects what's in the FAR. Next slide. So I wanted to give an example, and this is from another DoD publication, but it's an example of sharing savings in practice. This is a service contract, and there's some particular wrinkles to how you handle service contracts, but I think this is a really good example of just how this happens and why it makes sense. So before you had the VECP, the contract had a CLIN that required 10,800 full annual physicals for military personnel. at $100 a piece, that's a total cost on that contract of $1.08 million. After the VECP, what happened was, because there was this VE incentive and there was a reason for the contractor in this example to suggest a change even to the requirements. And the thinking was, well, look, most military personnel are pretty healthy by design. So maybe we don't actually have to have a full, complete annual physical every year for everybody in the military. So they said, let's divide the military into 3 buckets. The people who are under 25, they'll get a complete physical every 3 years. Between 26 and 35, they'll get a complete physical every 2 years. And over 35, they'll get a complete physical every year. So if you assume equal distribution, what you end up with is the after VECP. So you would be providing 6,000 annual physicals every year at a unit price, same unit price, $100,000. So that's $600,000. And then because of the adjustment to the requirements, you'd be only providing a modified physical to everyone who's not getting an annual physical, which would be the other 4,800 people. But that modified less than complete physical is going to cost half as much, only $50. And so the total contract price, the subtotal there, is $840,000 with the VECP rather than $1.08 million. Your savings overall is $240,000. And assuming this is they get a 50-50 share, that means the contractor would have would participate to the tune of $120,000. So the government, even giving that to or allowing the contractor to participate in half of its savings, it would still only be paying $980,000. So the government that decreases its cost by over 10%. Without value engineering incentive, there would be no reason for the contractor to propose changes in the requirements, because what they're saying is we're going to do less work. The value engineering, the sharing of the savings, if we assume, say, a 10% profit, that incentive of $120,000 more than compensates for the lost work that the contractor is getting up. And so the government still comes out ahead. The contractor comes out maybe a little bit ahead, but certainly they're incentivized. And so it's a win-win. And so that, I think, is a nice little illustration of the kinds of thinking that go into this and sort of how it works, how the math works out. Next slide. All right, so that's sort of the example. And we've talked about acquisition savings, can be realized on the instant contract, concurrent contracts, future contracts. And what we're talking about is, as we mentioned before, the net acquisition savings. And net acquisition savings result when the total savings are greater than the total of the government cost and any negative instant contract savings. So negative instant contract savings are where the government has to spend a little bit more money, or the VECP results in fewer savings for the instant contract, and maybe they're in the out years on concurrent or future contracts. And so one of the things is whether or not the contract is an incentive or non-incentive contract. And this is part of when I was saying things are pretty dense. The realization of shared savings, the rules are fairly, not complicated, but you just have to sort of walk through them. Let's go to the next slide. So the mechanics here, the contractor is supposed to save a share in the savings on all of the affected units that are scheduled for delivery during the sharing period. Remember, the CO sets the sharing period. Contractor has to retain records for 3 years. The contractor's share of savings are paid through the contract under which the VECP was accepted. And the CO is going to modify that contract to reflect the savings within 3 months after concurrent contracts have been modified to reflect the price reductions. And so all of that is going to be collected by the CO or the CO's minions and reflected in the instant contract. Next slide, please. So I say all that. The one hiccup would be, the government would normally share collateral savings unless it's just too costly to figure out what those are. And so in some cases, figuring out the savings, and this is one of the complications with services contracts. Sometimes it's just really hard to figure that out. So the share can range from 20 to 100% of the estimated savings during a typical year of use, but there are caps on how big that number can get. And so we talk about the firm fixed price, target price or cost or estimated cost at the time the VECP was accepted, or $100,000. And the contracting officer, just like they're supposed to, again, decide the sharing period, the sharing rate here, and they have to look at, okay, how is this going to degrade, if at all, performance, service life, or capability? And so it might be something, you might only get 25% if it's just not as big of a benefit. So it helps in one area, but maybe it hurts in another. New paragraph, or next slide, sorry. So one alternative, if it may be that if it's just too hard to figure out things sort of beyond the instant contract and concurrent contracts with the same contracting officer, another alternative is to essentially have a no-cost settlement where the CO decides, hey, the other approaches really aren't going to be more cost-effective, and no-cost settlement is going to provide the right amount of consideration for the government. And so basically what happens there is the contractor says, okay, I agree to take the savings on the instant contract and my concurrent contracts, but that's it. The government keeps any savings resulting from concurrent contracts placed with other sources, so somebody other than the contractor, and the savings from all future contracts and any collateral savings, which, remember, that might be a savings in logistics that's just kind of hard to figure out. So instead of a 25 or 75-25 or a 50-50, we basically divide up the sharing between sort of the sources of the sharing. And the parties have to agree. This is one of these things where it has to be mutual, that this makes sense as an alternative to the standard sharing of savings. New slide. So I think I kind of touched on this earlier, but there are other kinds of incentives, and I think the general rule is you don't stack them. So we want to, the government wants to incentivize its contractors in as many ways as possible, but they're not going to reward benefits, or reward a contractor for benefits under a VECP and under, say, a performance or design to costs incentive if that's in the contract. So really, you're just not going to double count. And so only the benefits of an accepted VECP that aren't covered by something else are going to be rewarded under the VE clause. Next slide. So talking about the contracting clause, so basically there's three. There is for supply and services contracts. Well, before we get there, this clause, the value engineering clause, is included in all contracts over the simplified acquisition threshold. And if the CO decides that there is a potential for significant savings, they will include them as well in smaller, less value contracts. Except, and the exceptions for including these are R&D contracts, other than full-scale development, personal services, nonprofit engineering services. You can see the other things, or where the agency head has decided, hey, we're not going to use that for this contract. We're not going to use value engineering. So, but in general, I mean, the general rule, in most cases, you're going to have a value engineering clause. The problem is, or maybe it's not a problem, but it's a reality. Often contractors don't really think about that. They're not thinking about that as an opportunity. And I want to encourage everybody in the audience to do that. Think about, are there things that we can, are there savings that we can put into place? And I think that it's important, perhaps, to take that into account as you're bidding on a contract. If you know the value engineering is in there, and you know you feel like you've got a pretty good answer that will be accepted, maybe that you take that into account when you're figuring out what your actual proposal cost is. Just throwing it out there as a possibility, but I think it's important to keep this in mind. I think a lot of contractors in many contracts just sort of gloss over the opportunity. Next slide. All right, so I talked about three. The first of the value engineering clauses is 52248-1. This provides the value engineering incentive. Remember the voluntary VE incentive. So if you're also going to have, so the basic is just the VE incentive. If you're going to have instead mandatory or required or directed the value engineering program, mandatory value engineering effort, you use Alt-1, and you use Alt-2 if you're going to have both value engineering incentive and a mandatory program requirement. Remember we talked about when the government says, hey, we want you to be reporting to us on a regular basis and thinking about how you're going to propose improvements, because we believe as the government that there's a lot of potential return on investment for VE. So two alts there. Next slide. All right, so there's also Alt-3, and Alt-3 basically, if the head of the contracting activity determines that the cost of computing and tracking collateral savings is going to exceed the benefits, and we talked about it's too much, then you're going to put in Alt-3. And if it's just the basic, you add Alt-3 to the basic 248.1. If it's value engineering program, so you're using Alt-1, you would use also Alt-3 if that condition is met. And then again, Alt-2 and Alt-3 if you have both the value engineering incentive and a program requirement. So that's kind of just maybe obvious. We're going to build or adjust 248-1. Let's look now at the next slide. Next, one back. Yeah, so there's also for A&E contracts, and I've left out some of the details. There are special rules within Part 48 that apply to value engineering within A&E contract. There is also a separate clause, 52248-2, and you use that where the government is requiring and paying for a specific value engineering effort in an A&E contract. You don't, in this case, use 248-1. So A&E, you use 248-2, not 248-1. You do need to look at the other special rules relating to A&E contracts, however. So next slide is the third value engineering FAR contract clause is 248-3, which is for construction. Again, there are specific rules for construction elsewhere in this part. So you use it, again, where you've got the contract amount is estimated to exceed the construction simplified acquisition threshold, unless you've got an incentive contract. Again, if the CO decides that there's a real potential for significant savings, they can include the clause in a smaller contract. But you don't include the clause in incentive type construction contracts. Then again, there is an Alt 1 to 52248-3, and if the cost of computing and tracking collateral savings exceeds the benefits, then you use Alt 1 to 52248-3. So again, as is always the case in the FAR, there is a section that's essentially the cookbook that tells you if then. If these conditions are met, you use this clause, and there are 3 different kinds of value engineering clauses with some alternate versions. Next slide. All right, I want to touch base quickly on sort of the takeaways here. I know we've had a quick spin through this part. There is a lot more there, like I said, and I think this is an area where you can't really dabble. You have to dig in, maybe rely on some outside resources to get smart, and really go through value engineering as a concept and your agency's specific rules. Value engineering contracts are great in that they offer the opportunity to be rewarded for ingenuity and finding ways to do things better. If you think about your general award decision and the evaluation criteria, you know, it's often the case that you don't get extra credit for doing something really ingenious, really creative. The value engineering clause, this whole concept is something that does reward that. And so if you've got a great idea, you might not get credit in the evaluation, but it may be something that you can be rewarded for under the VE clause. Just remember that your specific experience, the rights and requirements under VECP, any contract modifications, you know, what the CO decides in terms of sharing periods, the sharing rate, etc., is going to depend on a lot of different factors. And as I said earlier, I think it's very important as you're considering value engineering and how you might pursue that and how you might convince the contracting officer this is a great deal for you, government. You need to take all of those factors into consideration. Another reason you don't dabble. You really have to dig in. And I think success in this area really does require careful attention to detail and really smart negotiation of not only the contract terms, but also negotiating with the CO who has so much discretion to convince them that what you want to see done is what really makes sense for the government, and then you get rewarded for that. It's a great way, in addition to financial remuneration, to develop a good relationship with your customer, because if they can count on you to consistently be looking for and delivering value, additional value improvement, cutting their cost while still giving them what they want and meeting their requirements, that's a way to make a happy customer, and happy customers are good customers. So that's all I've got for today. I hope this has been helpful for you. I appreciate very much the opportunity to speak to you today that Jenny Schaus and Associates has afforded me, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you for a great presentation, Eric, and to our audience members, we thank you again for participating with us. If you have questions about this part, please contact our speaker with the contact information you see on the screen. And if you have any questions about federal contracting or need assistance with any of our services, please contact us directly. Thank you again for joining us. This concludes today's webinar.